The Duke attended one last dinner of prospects, unaware the widow who entered would change his life. The crystal glasses clinked in muted celebration as Lord Alaric de Vennes, the Duke of Kesmond, observed the performance unfolding before him. The Marquis of Thurwood's grand dining hall gleamed beneath a constellation of chandeliers, their light reflecting off silver cutlery and the hopeful eyes of unmarried ladies. This was to be his final appearance at such affairs, a last concession to societal obligation, before retreating to the solitude he had come to prefer, since his Duchess had departed this world 5 winters past. "Your Grace appears uncommonly pensive this evening," remarked Lady Haverley, her voice honeyed with practiced charm. Her daughter, seated strategically across from him, offered a demure smile, her youth and dowry displayed with equal deliberation. "Perhaps His Grace finds our conversation lacking," tittered another mother, adjusting her daughter's posture with a discreet touch. The Duke inclined his head politely. "On the contrary, I find myself quite engaged by the discourse." A lie wrapped in courtesy, as was the custom. "I merely contemplate the exceptional efforts of our hostess." The Marquis of Thurwood, seated at the far end of the table, preened at the acknowledgement. She was London's most formidable matchmaker. Her dinner parties the altar upon which social contracts were sealed with champagne and significant glances. "After tonight, de Vennes, you simply must select someone," she had insisted earlier, her fan punctuating each syllable. "A duke requires heirs, and Kesmond Hall deserves a mistress." He had not deigned to remind her that Kesmond had witnessed the burial of its mistress, and with her, his heart. Instead, he had nodded with aristocratic restraint, knowing this would be his final performance in this particular theatre. A footman appeared at his elbow, presenting a selection of wines. The Duke selected without interest, his gaze drifting across the tableau of ambition, dressed in silk and lace. Each face bore the same calculation, the mathematics of title and fortune against youth and childbearing potential. He had endured a dozen such evenings since reluctantly re-entering society. This would be the last. "The season has been particularly vivacious, has it not?" continued Lady Haverley, "though I dare say the selection of eligible gentlemen grows distressingly thin." "Indeed," contributed another matron, "which makes your Grace's presence all the more significant." The Duke's response died on his lips as the grand doors opened. The butler, visibly discomfited by the interruption, cleared his throat. "Lady Isolde Merron," he announced. A hush descended upon the gathering as the latecomer entered. Dressed in dove-grey silk with modest silver accents, she stood in stark contrast to the vibrant plumage of the other women. The Marquis's face registered momentary displeasure before arranging itself into a welcoming smile. "Lady Merron, what an unexpected pleasure," she said, gesturing toward an empty seat, deliberately distant from the Duke. "We had not anticipated your attendance." "Forgive my tardiness," replied the newcomer, her voice low and melodious. The weather proved uncooperative. The assembly absorbed her appearance with covert scrutiny. The Duke, however, found himself struck by her composure. Unlike the others, she wore neither the blank innocence of youth nor the predatory vigilance of their chaperones. Her eyes, a shade of green reminiscent of olive groves in Tuscany, held something far more intriguing, serenity born of suffering. "The widow Merron," whispered Lady Haverley to her companion, not quite quietly enough, "lost her husband in that dreadful Channel crossing. Not a farthing to her name, I'm told, save what her father left in trust." The Duke observed how Lady Merron's hand briefly touched a small brooch at her collar, a delicate olive leaf rendered in silver, before her attention returned to the table. She betrayed no reaction to the whispers that trailed her like shadows. Conversation resumed, but Alaric found his attention repeatedly drawn to her. She ate with the precision of one who understood hunger beyond the abstract, her responses to queries both measured and genuine. When Lady Haverley's daughter performed at the pianoforte after dinner, Lady Merron's applause lacked the mechanical quality of social obligation. There was something honest in her appreciation that struck the Duke as nearly revolutionary in these circles. As the evening progressed into the drawing room, he found himself navigating toward her without conscious decision. She stood apart, examining a small collection of miniatures displayed on a side table. "An unusual addition to the Marquis's collection," he remarked, indicating a pastoral scene unlike the family portraits surrounding it. Lady Merron's gaze met his directly. "Perhaps the rarity of sincerity makes it worth displaying, Your Grace." There was no coquettish lowering of lashes, no artificial inflection. The Duke felt a peculiar sensation, as if a window had been opened in a long-shuttered room. "You have me at a disadvantage, madam," he responded, finding himself strangely invigorated by her directness. "I suspect that occurs rarely in your experience," she replied, the ghost of a smile touching her lips, "though I imagine such disadvantages might occasionally prove illuminating." The Duke felt something within him stir, a curiosity long dormant. "Lady Merrin, might I inquire?" But the Marquis appeared between them with the precision of a cavalry charge. "Your Grace, Miss Haverley is about to favour us with another selection. I've saved you a most advantageous seat." As he was led away, Alaric glanced back. Lady Merrin had returned her attention to the miniatures, but the slight tension in her shoulders suggested an awareness of his departure. For the first time that evening, perhaps in many evenings, he found himself genuinely reluctant to move away. The following morning dawned with uncharacteristic brightness, sunlight streaming through the heavy drapes of the Duke's London residence. Alaric found himself awake earlier than usual, the events of the previous evening lingering in his mind like the final notes of a sonata. "Is something amiss with your breakfast, Your Grace?" inquired Thornfield, his valet of 20 years whose dignity remained undisturbed even by his master's uncharacteristic restlessness. "Nothing whatsoever," replied the Duke, though he had scarcely touched the meticulously prepared meal. "I find my appetite somewhat diminished this morning." Thornfield's expression remained perfectly neutral, though decades of service allowed him the liberty of a subtle arch of his eyebrow. "Perhaps Your Grace might benefit from fresh air. The morning papers mention an exhibition of botanical illustrations at the Royal Society. Most educational, I understand." The Duke recognized the gentle manipulation, but found himself amenable to it. "A capital suggestion, Thornfield. Have the carriage prepared." An hour later, Alaric found himself wandering among glass cases of exquisitely rendered flora. The exhibition hall was mercifully uncrowded at this early hour, allowing him the luxury of solitude as he examined detailed studies of specimens from across the empire. He paused before a particularly fine rendering of an olive branch, the silver-green leaves reminiscent of the brooch worn by "Your Grace," came a voice that he recognized instantly. "I had not expected to encounter nobility among scientific illustrations." Lady Merrin stood a few paces away, her expression suggesting genuine surprise rather than the manufactured coincidences so common in the social season. She wore a walking dress of deep plum, practical for the cool morning, with the same olive-leaf brooch at her collar. "Lady Merrin," he acknowledged with a bow, "I confess a particular interest in botanical accuracy. My estate in Derbyshire includes modest gardens. Modest, I imagine, only by ducal standards," she replied with that same hint of a smile, "though I find it refreshing that you take interest in what grows there." "And what brings you to such scholarly pursuits this morning?" he asked, falling into step beside her as they moved to the next display case. "I teach drawing to children at St. Agnes's orphanage," she answered, her gaze fixed on the illustration before them. "Several show particular promise with botanical subjects. I thought to improve my own knowledge to better guide them." The Duke regarded her with newfound curiosity, an uncommon occupation for a lady of your standing. "Perhaps," she conceded, though no more uncommon than a duke who notices olive leaves when surrounded by England's most eligible daughters. Her candour startled a genuine laugh from him, a sound so unfamiliar that it seemed to surprise them both equally. Several nearby patrons turned, astonished to witness the notoriously reserved Duke of Kesmond displaying such unguarded emotion. "You speak with remarkable directness, Lady Merrin. I have found, Your Grace, that life is far too brief for the luxury of dissembling." A shadow passed across her features. "My husband held similar convictions. He considered truth the only gift of value. The late Captain Merrin, I understand." The Duke spoke carefully, mindful of the whispered gossip from the previous evening. "Lost at sea, if I recall." "Yes," she replied simply. "The Channel crossing to Calais, 3 winters past. A sudden storm." Her fingers touched the olive-leaf brooch with a gesture that seemed unconscious. "He was transporting olive saplings from Italy, a gift for our small estate. None survived the journey." They stood in silence before the illustrations, the murmur of other visitors a distant hum. The Duke found himself contemplating the peculiar courage required to speak of loss without embellishment or self-pity. "I have kept you from your studies long enough," he said finally, "though I would be honored if you would permit me to call upon you properly, perhaps tomorrow afternoon." Lady Merrin regarded him with those clear olive eyes. "Your Grace, while I appreciate the courtesy, I must speak plainly. I have no intention of remarrying, nor any dowry to recommend me if I did. If you seek a bride, as all of London believes, I would be an imprudent choice. And if I simply seek conversation unencumbered by matrimonial speculation, then I would question your judgment, sir, though not your sincerity." There was that almost smile again. "I reside with my cousin, Lady Hartwood, in Bloomsbury. Tuesdays and Thursdays I am generally at home." With a small curtsy, she moved toward the exit, leaving the Duke in a state of contemplation unfamiliar to him. He returned his attention to the olive branch illustration, studying its precise lines with renewed interest. Upon his return home, he found an envelope awaiting him, an invitation to Lady Hartwood's small literary gathering the following evening. The Duke, who had declined similar invitations for years, surprised his secretary by requesting an acceptance be dispatched immediately. That night, for the first time since his Duchess's passing, Alaric dreamt of gardens rather than graves. 2 evenings later, the Duke's carriage arrived at Lady Hartwood's modest but respectable Bloomsbury residence. The house possessed none of the grandeur of Mayfair mansions, but radiated a comfortable elegance that spoke of taste rather than ostentation. Lady Hartwood, a sharp-eyed widow of 60 with a reputation for intellectual pursuits, greeted him with undisguised surprise. "Your Grace honors us unexpectedly," she remarked, her shrewd gaze suggesting she found his presence both remarkable and suspicious. "I cannot recall when you last attended a gathering of our little circle." "I find myself increasingly drawn to substantive discourse, Lady Hartwood," he replied, his eyes scanning the modest assembly for a particular face. "Indeed," she replied dryly. "How fortunate that my cousin's presence has coincided with this intellectual awakening." Lady Isolde Merrin stood near the window, engaged in conversation with a distinguished gentleman whom the Duke recognized as Professor Holloway of Oxford, an authority on classical literature. She wore a gown of deep sapphire blue, simple in design, yet elegant in its restraint. The silver olive leaf caught the lamplight as she gestured to emphasize a point in their discussion. "Ah, Holloway," the Duke said as he approached, "subjecting another innocent to your theories on Homeric translation." The professor adjusted his spectacles with a good-natured harumph. "Your Grace remains as impertinent as when you were my student. Lady Merrin, unlike some, appreciates the subtle distinctions between Chapman's and Pope's interpretations." "I merely suggested that emotion sometimes captures truth more faithfully than precision," Lady Merrin replied, her eyes meeting the Duke's with quiet amusement. "Though I suspect His Grace might have opinions on the matter." "More opinions than expertise, I assure you," Alaric admitted. "Holloway will confirm I was a most indifferent scholar." "Indifferent, perhaps, but never dull," the professor countered. "Your essay comparing Penelope's weaving to political strategy was quite revolutionary, if somewhat heretical." He turned to Lady Merrin. "I shall leave you to the Duke's dubious literary opinions while I refresh my tea." As the professor departed, a momentary silence fell between them, not the strained silence of social obligation, but something more companionable. "You surprise me, Your Grace," Lady Merrin observed at length. "Few noblemen of my acquaintance would admit to anything less than excellence in their academic pursuits. I find false expertise tedious, particularly when surrounded by genuine scholars," he replied, "though I admit to curiosity about your interest in classical translation." "My father was a professor of Greek at Cambridge," she explained. "Our home was filled with more books than furniture. Captain Merrin often joked he had married Athena rather than Helen." The Duke smiled. "A wise man, to value wisdom over mere beauty." "He valued truth above all," she corrected gently, "in people as in translation." Their conversation flowed with remarkable ease as the evening progressed, moving from literature to music, from philosophy to the more practical matters of estate management. The Duke found himself describing Kesmond's gardens with unexpected enthusiasm, while Lady Merrin spoke of her work with the orphaned children of St. Agnes's. "They have so little, yet show such resilience," she explained, a warmth entering her voice that transformed her features. "One boy, Thomas, draws birds with extraordinary sensitivity, despite having never held a proper artist's pencil before I brought them." "You've created something meaningful," the Duke observed, "far more so than many who claim greater influence." "It is small work compared to the responsibilities of a dukedom," she demurred. "Size and significance rarely correlate in matters of consequence," he countered. "I manage vast holdings, yet often question what meaning truly resides in such possession." Lady Hartwood approached, eyebrows raised in subtle inquiry. "Your Grace, might I tempt you to join our discussion of Byron's latest? Lord Carmichael insists it represents moral decay rather than poetic innovation." "A tempting battle, Lady Hartwood, but I find I must reluctantly depart." The Duke turned to Lady Merrin. Might I call upon you tomorrow? Perhaps you would permit me to contribute some drawing supplies for your promising young artists. That would be most kind, Your Grace, she replied, her expression revealing genuine appreciation rather than calculated gratitude. The children would be delighted. As the Duke took his leave, Lady Hartwood accompanied him to the door. Your sudden interest in charitable pursuits is most intriguing, Your Grace, she observed, her tone dry as aged sherry. I have neglected many worthy causes in recent years, he acknowledged, meeting her shrewd gaze directly. Perhaps it is time to remedy such oversight. Indeed. The elderly woman's eyes sparkled with intelligence. My cousin has suffered significant loss, Your Grace. Her work with those children represents healing as much as charity. I would not see that progress disrupted by aristocratic caprice. The Duke bowed with genuine respect. Your concern does you credit, Lady Hartwood. I assure you, caprice is not among my failings. No, she replied thoughtfully. I dare say it is not. Good evening, Your Grace. The following afternoon found the Duke's carriage laden with packages as it made its way towards St. Agnes's orphanage in one of London's less fashionable districts. Alaric had dispatched his secretary to London's finest art supply merchants with instructions to procure the best materials suitable for young students. The resulting collection included drawing papers, watercolors, proper brushes, and a selection of botanical volumes with color plates. St. Agnes's proved to be a modest building of weathered brick, clean but visibly worn by years and limited funds. As the Duke descended from his carriage, causing no small stir among the street vendors and residents of the narrow lane, he caught sight of Lady Merrin through an open window, bent in conversation with a small, serious-faced boy who appeared to be explaining something with great intensity. For a moment, Alaric stood unnoticed, struck by the tableau they created, her elegant profile turned in genuine attention to the child, sunlight catching the silver green of her brooch. The scene stirred something unfamiliar within him, a recognition of beauty that had nothing to do with conventional aesthetics and everything to do with authentic connection. When she glanced up and saw him, her surprise gave way to a smile, the first full, unguarded smile he had witnessed from her. It transformed her entirely, and the Duke found himself momentarily arrested by the change. "Your Grace," she called, beckoning him toward the entrance, "you arrive at a most opportune moment. Thomas has just completed a remarkable study of a nightingale." As he entered the modest schoolroom, packages in tow, the Duke of Kesmond stepped into a world far removed from the glittering drawing rooms of Mayfair and felt for the first time in years that he might be exactly where he belonged. The children of St. Agnes's orphanage regarded the Duke with the wary curiosity of those unaccustomed to nobility in their midst. Their small faces, pinched with the premature gravity that hardship bestows, studied him as he might once have examined foreign dignitaries at court. "Your Grace," Lady Merrin addressed him with the hint of a curtsy, though her eyes held a quiet amusement at his evident discomfort, "may I present our aspiring artists?" The Duke nodded solemnly to the assembled children, who ranged from perhaps 5 to 13 years of age. "I understand you have been creating works of considerable merit," he said, his formal tone softening as he spoke. A small girl with a riot of copper curls and a missing front tooth regarded him skeptically. "Are you really a duke?" she inquired, immune to the horrified shushing of the matron who oversaw the orphanage. "I assure you I am," Alaric replied, finding himself oddly refreshed by her directness, "though I confess I have never been particularly skilled at drawing." This admission seemed to ease the children's apprehension more effectively than any display of condescension might have done. The copper-haired girl, introduced as Lily, nodded with grave understanding. "Some people just haven't the knack," she consoled him, "but you might improve with practice." Lady Merrin's eyes met his over the child's head, alight with suppressed mirth. "His Grace has brought materials that might assist in your artistic development," she explained to her young charges. "Perhaps you might show your gratitude by demonstrating your recent progress." The children needed no further encouragement. Thomas, the serious boy the Duke had observed through the window, solemnly presented his nightingale study. It was rendered with remarkable sensitivity for one so young, capturing not merely the bird's form but something of its essential character. "You have a genuine talent," the Duke told him, and was rewarded with a flush of pleasure across the boy's thin face. "Thomas could be a great natural philosopher one day," Lady Merrin remarked. "He observes with extraordinary patience." The afternoon unfolded in a manner entirely foreign to the Duke's experience. He found himself seated on a bench too small for his frame, surrounded by earnest young artists eager to display their work. Lady Merrin moved among them with natural grace, offering encouragement here, gentle correction there. The light through the tall windows caught the silver threads in her dark hair, creating a momentary halo as she bent to guide a young hand. "You appear remarkably at ease in this environment," the Duke observed, when they found a moment of relative privacy as the children worked on their new papers with absorbed concentration. "These children see the world without pretense," she replied. "After years in society, such honesty feels like drawing a clean breath. I confess I find myself similarly refreshed," he admitted, "though I fear I lack your natural facility with young minds." "They respond to authenticity above all," she said. "Titles impress them far less than genuine interest." As the afternoon light began to wane, the Duke noticed Lady Merrin touch her temple briefly, a gesture quickly concealed but suggestive of discomfort. "You are fatigued," he observed quietly. "A slight headache, nothing of consequence," she demurred, though the pallor beneath her composure suggested otherwise. "Lady Merrin, while I hesitate to presume, my carriage stands ready. Might I offer to convey you to Lady Hartwood's residence? The hour grows late, and these narrow streets—" She regarded him thoughtfully, as though weighing something beyond the simple offer of transportation. "Thank you, Your Grace. I would be grateful for the convenience." After bidding farewell to the children, who extracted from the Duke a solemn promise to return with materials for painting birds, they departed. The contrast between the humble orphanage and the opulent interior of his carriage seemed suddenly stark, almost vulgar. "You have created something quite remarkable there," he said, as they navigated London's crowded streets. "They create it themselves," she corrected gently. "I merely provide opportunity. A rare gift, nonetheless." He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. "I have been considering the establishment of a school at Kesmond. The children of tenants and staff have little access to education beyond the most rudimentary parish offerings." Her expression brightened with genuine interest. "A most worthy endeavor, Your Grace. Education transforms possibilities in ways charity never can." "Indeed," he agreed, "though I find myself lacking in practical knowledge of such enterprises. I wonder if I might impose upon your expertise." "My modest experience is at your disposal," she replied, then added with that hint of a smile, "though I warn you, my views on education are considered rather progressive in certain circles." "I have found conventional wisdom frequently lacking in wisdom," the Duke responded, surprising himself with his candor. "Progressive views would be most welcome." As the carriage approached Lady Hartwood's residence, a fine mist began to fall, softening the harsh edges of London's architecture. The Duke, acting on instinct rather than calculation, reached across to adjust the carriage blanket over Lady Merrin's lap, a simple gesture of consideration. Their hands briefly met, and though the contact lasted but a moment, Alaric felt a curious warmth spread through him, as though some long-dormant part of himself had stirred to life. "Thank you," she said softly, and he understood she referred to more than the blanket or the ride. "It is I who am grateful," he replied, "for an afternoon of uncommon authenticity." As the carriage drew to a halt, the Duke's groom appeared with an umbrella. Alaric descended first, then offered his hand to assist Lady Merrin. Even through gloves, he was acutely aware of the delicate strength in her fingers. "Good evening, Lady Merrin," he said, bowing formally despite the gentle rain. "Might I call upon you tomorrow? I find myself with several questions regarding educational philosophy." "Until tomorrow, then, Your Grace," she replied, the silver olive leaf at her collar catching the last light of day as she turned toward her cousin's door. That night, as Thornfield assisted him in preparing for bed, the Duke found himself uncharacteristically reflective. "Is something troubling Your Grace?" the valet inquired, noting his master's abstraction. "Not troubling precisely," Alaric responded. "I find myself contemplating the nature of purpose, Thornfield." "A weighty consideration for the evening hours, sir." The Duke smiled faintly. "Indeed, yet perhaps overdue." As he lay in his vast bed, Alaric realized that for the first time in years, his thoughts before sleep were neither of duty nor loss, but of possibility. "Your Grace has been conspicuously absent from Lady Melbourne's soirees," remarked Lord Hatherton, his tone suggesting both curiosity and mild censure as they stood in the hushed sanctuary of White's Club. "Society begins to speculate upon your activities." The Duke of Kesmond regarded his long-time acquaintance with measured patience. Hatherton, while good-hearted, served as an unwavering barometer of social convention. "I have been engaged in matters requiring personal attention," he replied, the deliberate vagueness of his response an invitation to change the subject. Hatherton, however, possessed the tenacity common to those with abundant leisure. "Personal matters involving charitable work in St. Giles, if rumour speaks truth," he persisted, lowering his voice to a confidential murmur. "And in the company of the widow Merrin, no less. Lady Merrin possesses considerable expertise in educational methods," Alaric stated, his tone cooling perceptibly. "Her assistance has proven invaluable in assessing the feasibility of establishing a school at Kesmond." "Ah, a school," Hatherton echoed, relief evident in his expression. "A commendable enterprise indeed. For a moment one feared, that is, certain parties had suggested." He trailed off, discomfited by the Duke's steady gaze. "Suggested what precisely?" Alaric inquired with dangerous politeness. "Nothing of consequence," Hatherton hastened to assure him. "Merely idle speculation regarding the lady's circumstances. Widowed so young with modest means, one knows how vulnerable the heart can be in the face of genuine compassion." The Duke set down his brandy glass with deliberate care. "I trust you speak from general observation, rather than specific knowledge of Lady Merrin's heart," he said quietly. Hatherton blanched slightly. "Of course, Your Grace, I meant no disrespect." "Then none is taken," Alaric replied, though his expression suggested otherwise. "If you'll excuse me, I have a prior engagement." As he departed the club, the Duke found himself uncharacteristically discomposed. Hatherton's insinuations, though clumsily delivered, reflected what would undoubtedly become common speculation. Lady Merrin's reputation, unblemished yet precarious due to her circumstances, could suffer from continued association with him, particularly in settings beyond conventional social gatherings. His carriage conveyed him to Lady Hartwood's residence, where he had been invited for afternoon tea. He found the elder lady alone in her drawing-room, her shrewd eyes appraising him over the rim of her teacup. "You appear troubled, Your Grace," she observed without preamble. "Has London society finally offended your sensibilities?" The Duke accepted the offered tea with a wry smile. "London society exists to offend sensibilities, Lady Hartwood. I find myself concerned with more practical matters, such as my cousin's reputation, perhaps." She arched an eyebrow. "Gossip travels with remarkable efficiency, even to unfashionable Bloomsbury. Your perspicacity remains undiminished," he acknowledged. "I had not intended to subject Lady Merrin to scrutiny. Isolde has endured far worse than whispers," Lady Hartwood replied. "After losing Hale, nothing society might conjecture could touch her deeply. Nevertheless, I value her good name as highly as she does." The elderly lady studied him thoughtfully. "Do you indeed, Your Grace? And what else of hers do you value, if I might be so bold?" Before the Duke could formulate a response, the door opened to admit Lady Merrin herself. She wore a walking dress of deep forest green, her cheeks flushed from the brisk spring air, the silver olive leaf catching the light as she moved. "Your Grace," she greeted him with evident surprise. "I had not expected to find you here. Cousin Lavinia failed to mention you would be joining us." "An oversight born of my advancing years, no doubt," Lady Hartwood murmured, her expression suggesting nothing of the sort. "I shall see about more tea." As the elder lady departed with surprising alacrity for one of her years, an uncharacteristic silence fell between the Duke and Lady Merrin. "I trust I find you well?" he inquired at length. "Quite well, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Though perhaps puzzled by your expression, you seem disquieted." The Duke considered his words carefully. "I have become aware that our collaboration on the school project has not escaped notice in certain circles." "Ah." Understanding crossed her features. "And you fear the inevitable speculation might prove detrimental?" "To your reputation, yes," he confirmed, studying her reaction closely. To his surprise, a smile touched her lips, not the restrained expression he had grown familiar with, but something warmer, tinged with genuine amusement. "Your Grace, while your concern does you credit, I assure you my reputation has weathered far sterner trials than the gossip of idle tongues. You are remarkably sanguine about the matter. I learned long ago the folly of measuring one's worth through the lens of society's approval," she replied. "Those whose opinion I value know my character. Those who would think ill of me upon such slender evidence are welcome to their misconceptions." The Duke found himself both startled and impressed by her equanimity. "Your perspective is refreshingly sensible, if somewhat unorthodox. Captain Merrin believed truth required neither defense nor apology," she said, her fingers touching the olive leaf brooch in that now familiar gesture. "It was among his many unconventional convictions. He sounds a remarkable man." He was. Her expression softened with memory. imperfect as we all are, but possessed of uncommon integrity. And courage, I suspect, to have won your heart. Her eyes met his, clear and direct. Courage, yes. Though perhaps more accurately, the courage to reveal vulnerability. She hesitated, then added with gentle emphasis, a quality not altogether common among men of rank. The Duke felt her words, as one might feel a key turning in a long unused lock. I have found, he said carefully, that vulnerability is more easily avoided than navigated. Yet, avoidance rarely leads to discovery, she countered softly. Lady Hartwood's return with fresh tea interrupted what had become a conversation of unexpected depth. The remainder of the visit passed in more conventional discourse, though the Duke found himself acutely aware of an unspoken understanding that now existed between himself and Lady Merrin, a recognition of shared insight that transcended social pleasantries. As he prepared to take his leave, the Duke addressed Lady Hartwood with formal courtesy. I wonder if I might prevail upon your generosity, madam. The Royal Botanical Gardens have mounted an exhibition of Mediterranean specimens, including several varieties of olive. Given Lady Merrin's interest in botanical subjects, perhaps you would permit me to escort you both to view the collection tomorrow afternoon. The elderly lady's eyes twinkled with undisguised amusement. Alas, Your Grace, my rheumatism prevents me from contemplating such an excursion. However, I see no impropriety in Isolde attending with you, provided you take my companion, Mrs. Winters, as chaperone. Your consideration is most appreciated, the Duke replied, bowing over her hand. When he turned to Lady Merrin, he found her regarding him with that quiet, thoughtful gaze that had come to fascinate him. Until tomorrow, then, he said. Until tomorrow, Your Grace, she echoed, and something in her tone suggested that they spoke of possibilities beyond a mere botanical exhibition. The Royal Botanical Gardens glowed with spring's gentle insistence, each path bordered by nature's most exquisite compositions. Lady Merrin walked beside the Duke with unhurried grace, while Mrs. Winters, Lady Hartwood's companion and designated chaperone, maintained a discreet distance that balanced propriety with privacy. I confess a particular fondness for gardens in this season, the Duke remarked, as they paused before a display of Mediterranean flora. There is something profoundly hopeful in the emergence of new growth after winter's severity. Hope resides in renewal, Lady Merrin agreed, her gaze drawn to a small olive sapling, its silver-green leaves catching the filtered sunlight, though I find equal beauty in the persistence of evergreens through the darkest months. The Duke observed her profile as she studied the plant, struck by the quiet composure that seemed her natural state. The olive is particularly tenacious, he noted, capable of surviving conditions that would destroy less resilient species. Indeed, her fingers brushed her brooch in that now familiar gesture. Captain Merrin once told me that in ancient Greece, the olive was sacred to Athena, symbol of peace, wisdom, and resurrection. A smile touched her lips. He claimed I possessed all three qualities, though I assured him wisdom at least remained aspirational. I would not be so certain, the Duke replied. Your insights regarding the educational program for Kesmond have revealed considerable wisdom. They continued their promenade, conversation flowing with surprising ease between discussions of botany, literature, and the more practical aspects of establishing a rural school. As they reached the Mediterranean Conservatory, a cathedral of glass housing specimens requiring warmer conditions, Mrs. Winters discreetly announced her intention to rest on a nearby bench. Within the humid warmth of the conservatory, they stood before a mature olive tree, its gnarled trunk speaking of decades of patient growth. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, creating a dappled effect through the silver-green canopy. It was trees like this one that Captain Merrin hoped to establish at our small estate, Lady Merrin said softly. He believed they would thrive, despite conventional wisdom regarding England's climate. A man of vision, clearly, the Duke observed, and occasional glorious impracticality, she added with fond remembrance. He once commandeered an entire ship's dining room to demonstrate the proper method of pruning olive branches to skeptical fellow passengers. The Duke smiled at the image. I find myself increasingly curious about Captain Merrin. Your descriptions paint a character of uncommon vitality. He lived fully, she confirmed, perhaps knowing somehow that his time would be brief. Her expression grew contemplative. After his loss, I discovered among his papers a letter addressed to me, to be opened in the event of his death. Among his final thoughts was concern that grief might lead me to withdraw from life's possibilities. She turned to face the Duke directly, her olive eyes clear and steady. He wrote, "Do not honor my memory by diminishing your future, but by embracing it with the courage we shared." It was the most difficult and the most precious gift he could have left me. Alaric felt a profound respect wash over him, both for the man who had written such words and the woman who had found the strength to honor them. "A remarkable legacy," he said quietly. "Yes." Her gaze returned to the olive tree. "Though I confess there are days when courage proves elusive. Yet you continue your work with the orphaned children, establish educational opportunities, face society's scrutiny with composure," the Duke observed. "If that is not courage, I confess I do not recognize the virtue." A soft laugh escaped her. "Your Grace is most generous in his assessment." "Alaric," he said suddenly. When she looked at him in surprise, he continued with careful deliberation. "When we speak of matters beyond social pleasantries, I would be honored if you would address me by my name, rather than my title." She studied him for a long moment, as though seeing past the carefully constructed facade of ducal authority to the man beneath. "Alaric," she repeated softly, the name a gentle experiment on her lips. "And I am Isolde." Something shifted between them in that moment, a small but significant alteration in the careful balance they had maintained. The Duke found himself acutely aware of her proximity, the gentle rise and fall of her breath, the way sunlight caught the subtle auburn highlights in her dark hair. "Isolde," he echoed, finding unexpected pleasure in the simple intimacy of her name. "I find myself wondering what Captain Merrin would make of our acquaintance." A genuine smile illuminated her features. "Hale would likely observe that dukes, like olive trees, appear imposing but require careful attention to reveal their true nature." Her eyes held a teasing warmth he had not witnessed before. The Duke laughed with unfeigned delight. A perspicacious man indeed. Their conversation continued as they completed their circuit of the conservatory, returning to the cooler air of the main gardens where Mrs. Winters awaited them. As they walked, the Duke found himself contemplating how thoroughly his expectations of the afternoon had been surpassed. He had anticipated pleasant conversation. Instead, he had been granted glimpses of a mind and heart of uncommon quality. When they reached the garden entrance where his carriage awaited, the Duke addressed Mrs. Winters with formal courtesy. "Might I offer you both conveyance to Lady Hartwood's residence?" "Most kind, Your Grace," the companion replied with a curtsy. As they settled into the carriage, the Duke found himself seated opposite Lady Merrin. Isolde, he corrected himself silently, treasuring the private privilege of thinking of her by name. The afternoon light caught the silver olive leaf at her collar, transforming it momentarily into something luminous. "I have been considering your suggestions regarding the school at Kesmond," he said, as the carriage began its journey. "Particularly your emphasis on practical skills alongside traditional subjects. I wonder if you might consider visiting the estate to assess the existing structures and potential locations." Something like surprise flickered across her features. "You would value my opinion so highly?" "I find your perspective invaluable," he replied with simple honesty. "Few possess both practical experience and genuine vision." "I would be honored to assist," she said after a moment's consideration, "though such a journey would require careful planning." "Of course," the Duke agreed. "Lady Hartwood would be most welcome, as would Mrs. Winters. My sister, Lady Caroline, serves as Kesmond's hostess in my absence and would ensure all propriety is observed." Mrs. Winters, who had maintained a discreet silence, cleared her throat gently. "Lady Hartwood has mentioned her intention to visit her goddaughter in Bath next month. Perhaps such timing might prove advantageous for all parties." The Duke caught the subtle orchestration at work and found himself grateful for the quiet machinations of those who recognized value beyond social convention. "A most sensible suggestion," he acknowledged. "I shall write to Caroline directly." As the carriage approached Lady Hartwood's residence, the Duke found himself reluctant for the afternoon to conclude. There remained so much unspoken, so many thoughts he wished to share with the remarkable woman seated across from him. "Until tomorrow, then," he said as he assisted her from the carriage. "Perhaps you might share your thoughts on curriculum development when next we meet." "I shall prepare my most persuasive arguments," she replied, that hint of a smile playing at her lips again. "Good afternoon, Your Grace." "Good afternoon, Isolde," he responded, his voice pitched for her ears alone. The name lingered between them like a promise as she turned toward the house, the silver olive leaf catching the last light of day. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of Lady Hartwood's morning room, where Isolde sat composing a detailed outline of curriculum recommendations for the proposed Kesmond school. Her methodical hand moved steadily across the page, pausing occasionally as she considered the most effective approach to rural education. So absorbed was she in her task that the arrival of a messenger went unnoticed until her cousin entered, letter in hand. "From Kesmond House," Lady Hartwood announced, her sharp eyes studying Isolde's expression as she extended the sealed paper, delivered with particular emphasis on urgency. The missive bore the Duke's personal seal, not the formal ducal crest, but the smaller signet he used for private correspondence. Isolde broke the seal with steady fingers, though her pulse quickened despite her composure. "Lady Caroline extends a formal invitation to visit Kesmond," she explained, as she scanned the elegant script. "The Duke's sister suggests the first week of next month would prove most convenient, coinciding with your planned journey to Bath." "How remarkably fortuitous," Lady Hartwood remarked dryly. "One might almost suspect coordination." "Cousin Lavinia," Isolde admonished with gentle reproof, though a smile touched her lips, "you know perfectly well the suggestion originated with Mrs. Winters, who appears to have appointed herself architect of convenient timing." "Winters has always possessed a practical mind," the elder lady conceded, "though I wonder if she fully comprehends what she orchestrates." Isolde set the letter aside, her expression growing thoughtful. "If you object to the arrangement, I shall decline." "Object? At my age? My dear, I have witnessed enough of life to recognize its rare opportunities." Lady Hartwood settled into a chair opposite Isolde, her shrewd gaze softening slightly. "The question is not my approval, but your intentions. Kesmond represents more than an educational project, does it not?" Isolde's fingers found the olive leaf brooch at her collar, that unconscious gesture that had become so familiar. "I cannot deny that I find the Duke's company unexpectedly meaningful." "Alaric de Vennes is not a man given to casual pursuits," Lady Hartwood observed. "His interest suggests genuine regard." "Perhaps," Isolde agreed cautiously, "though the world would consider any deeper attachment between us entirely unsuitable." "The world," her cousin replied with characteristic astringency, "regularly celebrates the marriage of decrepit earls to girls scarcely older than their grandchildren. I dare say it can accommodate a duke's interest in a woman of intelligence and character." Isolde shook her head, a rueful smile playing across her lips. "Your loyalty is commendable, if somewhat biased. Age grants the privilege of clear vision, my dear. I see a man of substance who recognizes similar quality in you." She paused, then added more gently, "Hale would not wish you to refuse happiness out of misplaced loyalty to his memory." "It is not loyalty that gives me pause," Isolde admitted, "but rather uncertainty. The gulf between our positions is vast, and I have grown accustomed to independence." "Independence is admirable," Lady Hartwood conceded, "but so is courage in the face of unexpected possibility." Later that afternoon, as Isolde made her way to St. Agnes's for her regular teaching session, she found herself reflecting on her cousin's words. The orphanage's familiar brick facade came into view just as the sky darkened with gathering storm clouds. She quickened her pace, reaching the entrance as the first heavy drops began to fall. "Lady Merrin!" young Thomas exclaimed as she entered the schoolroom. "We feared you might not come with the weather turning so foul. A little rain would not keep me from our lessons," she assured him, removing her damp cloak, "particularly when I have promising works to review." The children gathered eagerly around her, their thin faces alight with anticipation. The Duke's generous provision of materials had transformed their modest artistic endeavors, and each child now possessed a proper sketchbook and quality pencils. As the storm intensified outside, Isolde lost herself in the simple joy of guiding young minds. Thunder occasionally punctuated their concentration, but the children remained absorbed in their work, creating small worlds of beauty despite the orphanage's Spartan surroundings. She had just begun to gather their materials as the lesson concluded, when the schoolroom door opened to admit a tall figure. The Duke stood in the doorway, rain-damp and slightly disheveled, his presence both unexpected and immediately commanding. "Your Grace," Mrs. Benning, the orphanage matron, exclaimed with evident dismay at his sudden appearance. "We had not anticipated—" "Forgive the intrusion," he interrupted smoothly, his gaze finding Isolde's. "I was passing nearby when the storm worsened. I thought perhaps Lady Merrin might require conveyance." The children stared in undisguised fascination at this aristocratic interloper, their natural reserve momentarily forgotten. "Have you come to see our drawings, sir?" Lily asked with characteristic directness. The Duke's expression softened as he addressed the small girl. "I would consider it a privilege if time permits." Isolde watched with quiet wonder as Alaric de Ven, Duke of Kesmond, whose lineage traced back to the Norman conquest, settled himself on a child-sized bench to examine smudged sketches with genuine interest. The rain lashed against the windows, creating a private world within the humble schoolroom. "Your nightingale shows remarkable improvement, Thomas," he observed, studying the boy's latest effort. "You've captured the distinctive shape of the bill with particular accuracy." The child's thin chest swelled with pride. "Lady Merrin showed us a book with proper illustrations. I've been practicing every evening." "Dedication bears fruit in all worthy pursuits," the Duke replied with gentle gravity. As the children displayed their work one by one, Isolde observed the transformation in Alaric's bearing. The formal reserve that typically characterized his public persona gave way to something more authentic, a quiet attentiveness that honored each child's efforts without condescension. When at last Mrs. Benning shepherded the young artists to their evening meal, the Duke and Isolde found themselves momentarily alone in the schoolroom. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain streaming down the windows in silvery rivulets. "Your appearance was most unexpected," Isolde remarked, gathering her teaching materials. "Though providential, given the weather." "Providence often wears the guise of deliberation," he admitted, a smile touching his eyes. "I had intended to call upon you at Lady Hartwood's, but learned you had departed for the orphanage. The storm merely accelerated my plans." "And what plans were those precisely?" she inquired, her tone gently teasing. "To discuss the Kesmond invitation," he replied, his expression growing more serious. "And to assure you that while I hope most earnestly for your acceptance, your comfort and reputation remain paramount." Isolde felt a curious warmth spread through her at his evident concern. "I have drafted a preliminary curriculum outline," she said, indicating the papers in her portfolio. "Though I confess, a first-hand assessment of the estate would prove invaluable." "Then you will come?" A note of genuine pleasure entered his voice. "Yes," she affirmed simply. "Though I must warn you, my educational philosophies may challenge conventional thinking." "I have come to value challenges to conventional thinking," he responded, his gaze holding hers with unexpected intensity, "particularly when they illuminate possibilities previously unconsidered." The moment hung between them, weighted with unspoken significance. Then, with careful deliberation, the Duke extended his hand to her. "The rain has slackened somewhat. My carriage awaits." As they departed the orphanage, protected from the diminishing rain by the Duke's large umbrella, Isolde found herself acutely conscious of his proximity. The evening air had cooled with the storm, carrying the cleansed scent of rain-washed stone and distant flowering trees. "I received correspondence from my sister this morning," the Duke remarked as they settled into the carriage. "Caroline expresses particular interest in meeting you. She has managed Kesmond's charitable endeavors since our parents' passing and shares your commitment to educational opportunity." "I look forward to making her acquaintance," Isolde replied. "Does she reside permanently at Kesmond?" "She divides her time between the estate and London, where her husband, Lord Ellsworth, maintains parliamentary duties," he explained. "Their marriage has proven a rare example of genuine compatibility, despite its conventional arrangement." As the carriage navigated the rain-slicked streets, their conversation continued with the easy flow that had come to characterize their interactions. Upon reaching Lady Hartwood's residence, the Duke descended first, then offered his hand to assist Isolde. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, retaining her gloved hand a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I shall call upon you in the afternoon, if convenient." "Most convenient," she confirmed, finding herself reluctant to withdraw her hand from his. As she ascended the steps to her cousin's door, Isolde felt his gaze upon her, attentive, appreciative, and filled with possibilities that both exhilarated and disquieted her carefully ordered existence. Kesmond Hall emerged from the morning mist like an aristocratic dream, its Elizabethan facade graceful yet imposing, its formal gardens extending into meticulously maintained parkland. The journey from London had occupied the better part of 2 days, requiring an overnight stay at a coaching inn, where the Duke had arranged private accommodations for the ladies with scrupulous attention to propriety. Now, as the carriage approached the main entrance, Isolde felt a curious mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The estate's grandeur spoke eloquently of centuries of privilege and power, a world far removed from her modest circumstances. "You appear pensive, my dear," Mrs. Winters observed, her practical nature having proven a comfortable presence throughout the journey. "Merely taking the measure of our destination," Isolde replied. though in truth she found herself measuring the distance between her life and that represented by Kesmond's stately presence. The carriage drew to a halt before the entrance, where a dignified complement of staff awaited their arrival. At their centre stood a woman whose bearing immediately proclaimed her identity, the same aristocratic posture as her brother, though softened by feminine grace. "Lady Caroline, I presume," Isolde murmured as the Duke handed her from the carriage. "My sister," he confirmed with a slight smile, prepared to pass judgment with remarkable efficiency. Lady Caroline Ellsworth advanced to greet them, her keen eyes missing nothing as she assessed her brother's guests. "Lady Merrin, Mrs. Winters, welcome to Kesmond," she said, her voice cultured and warm. "I trust your journey proved comfortable." "Exceedingly so, Lady Ellsworth," Isolde responded. "Your brother ensured every consideration." "Alaric excels at consideration when properly motivated," Lady Caroline remarked with a sidelong glance at her brother that contained both affection and subtle inquiry. "Please, come inside. Refreshment awaits, and I imagine you would welcome the opportunity to rest before dinner." The entrance hall soared 2 stories above them, its oak paneling and family portraits creating an atmosphere of historical continuity. Footmen moved with practiced efficiency, directing servants to convey luggage to the prepared chambers, while the housekeeper herself stepped forward to greet the visitors. "Mrs. Winters, you'll be situated in the blue suite," Lady Caroline explained. "Lady Merrin, I've placed you in the garden wing. The rooms offer a charming view of the rose garden and the lake beyond." "Most thoughtful," Isolde acknowledged, though she found herself momentarily overwhelmed by the casual grandeur surrounding her. Kesmond's scale made Hartwood House appear positively modest by comparison. As they followed Lady Caroline through the main hall toward the east wing, Isolde became aware of the Duke watching her with careful attention, as though gauging her reaction to his ancestral home. She offered him a small, reassuring smile, determined that her discomfort should not diminish the significance of his invitation. The chamber assigned to her proved both elegant and unexpectedly welcoming. Tall windows overlooked formal gardens that gave way to more natural landscaping, culminating in a silvery glimpse of the lake. Fresh flowers, not hothouse varieties, but seasonal blooms from the estate's gardens, filled a crystal vase on the writing desk. "I trust you'll find everything to your satisfaction," Lady Caroline said. "My maid, Fletcher, will attend you. Dinner is served at 7. Perhaps you might join me for tea in the small drawing room at 4. After Lady Caroline departed, Isolde moved to the window, gazing out at the verdant expanse of Kesmond. The contrast between this world and her own modest circumstances had never been more apparent. Yet it was not envy that filled her, but rather a profound awareness of the responsibility such privilege entailed, and a growing admiration for the manner in which the Duke appeared to approach that responsibility. Later, refreshed and changed into an afternoon gown of deep blue silk, among the finer pieces in her limited wardrobe, Isolde made her way to the small drawing room. She found Lady Caroline already present, elegant in dove grey with a single strand of pearls at her throat. "Ah, Lady Merrin," she greeted, setting aside a letter she had been perusing. "Precisely punctual, a quality I have always admired." "A naval captain's wife learns the value of time," Isolde replied with a smile as she took the offered seat. Lady Caroline studied her with undisguised interest as she poured the tea. "My brother speaks highly of your educational expertise," she observed, passing a delicate porcelain cup. "I confess myself curious about your approach to the proposed school. Education should extend beyond mere literacy," Isolde explained, warming to a subject dear to her heart, particularly in rural communities, where practical knowledge holds equal importance to academic understanding. Their conversation deepened as they discovered shared views on female education and the importance of providing genuine opportunity rather than mere charity. Lady Caroline's initial reserve gradually softened into something approaching genuine regard. "You are not what I expected," she admitted at length, setting aside her empty cup. "May I inquire what you did expect?" Isolde asked, her direct gaze meeting the other woman's. Lady Caroline's lips curved in a smile remarkably like her brother's. "Someone more calculated, perhaps. My brother's position naturally attracts those with agendas beyond themselves. I assure you, Lady Ellsworth, my only agenda is educational reform," Isolde replied, "though I value your brother's friendship immensely." "Friendship," Lady Caroline repeated thoughtfully, "a rare commodity in our circles, particularly between men and women." She hesitated, then added with deliberate care, "My brother has known profound loss, Lady Merrin. The late Duchess's passing left wounds that time has not entirely healed. Grief respects neither rank nor circumstance, Isolde observed quietly. It is perhaps the most democratic of human experiences. Something in Lady Caroline's expression shifted at these words, a subtle softening, an acknowledgement of shared understanding. Indeed, she agreed, though some bear its weight with greater grace than others. Their tête-à-tête was interrupted by the Duke's arrival. He entered with the relaxed demeanour of a man at home, though Isolde noted the subtle alertness in his gaze as it moved between his sister and herself. "I trust Caroline has been a gracious hostess," he remarked, his tone light but his eyes questioning. "Impeccably so," Isolde assured him. "We have discovered considerable common ground regarding educational philosophy." "How fortunate," he replied, the subtle tension in his shoulders easing. "I had hoped you might find each other congenial." "Your Lady Meren possesses both intelligence and principle, Alaric," Lady Caroline observed, her emphasis on the possessive pronoun delicate but unmistakable. "Qualities worthy of cultivation." The Duke's expression revealed nothing, though a faint colour touched his cheekbones. "I had planned to show Lady Meren the Eastfields tomorrow," he said, smoothly redirecting the conversation. "The old tithe barn might prove suitable for conversion to a schoolhouse." "An excellent suggestion," his sister agreed, "though perhaps this evening after dinner you might show her the library. I understand Lady Meren shares your interest in botanical texts." As the three continued their conversation, moving easily between practical matters concerning the estate and broader social questions, Isolde found herself drawn ever deeper into the private world of Kesmond. Lady Caroline, despite her initial reserve, revealed a sharp mind and genuine commitment to improving conditions for the estate's dependents. The Duke, in his ancestral setting, displayed a quiet confidence and deep knowledge of his responsibilities that spoke of character beyond mere inheritance. Dinner proved a more formal affair, with local gentry invited to round out the party. Isolde, seated to the Duke's right as the ranking female guest, found herself the object of curious scrutiny from the assembled company. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Thornhill, proved particularly determined to ascertain the precise nature of her connection to Kesmond. "How fortunate that your educational expertise should come to His Grace's attention," she remarked with practiced casualness. "One wonders how such a felicitous introduction occurred." Before Isolde could formulate a suitably vague response, the Duke intervened smoothly. "Lady Meren's reputation in educational circles preceded her," he stated, his tone discouraging further inquiry. "Her work with St. Agnes's orphanage has proven particularly noteworthy." "How charitable," Mrs. Thornhill replied, her emphasis suggesting something rather less complimentary. Lady Caroline, observing from her position at the opposite end of the table, deftly redirected the conversation toward the upcoming village fair, a safer topic that engaged the local dignitaries while relieving Isolde of unwelcome attention. Later, as promised, the Duke escorted Isolde to Kesmond's famed library, a magnificent two-story chamber whose collection had been assembled over centuries. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, gazing up at the gallery that encircled the main floor, its shelves laden with leather-bound volumes reaching toward the coffered ceiling. "My grandfather's particular passion," the Duke explained, watching her reaction with evident pleasure. "Though I have made my own contributions, particularly in natural sciences and agricultural improvement," he guided her toward a large table where several volumes lay open, botanical texts, she realized, specifically focused on Mediterranean species, and prominently displayed among them a detailed treatise on olive cultivation. "You have been researching olive trees," she observed, touching one of the detailed illustrations with gentle fingers. "I find myself increasingly interested in their cultivation requirements," he acknowledged, "particularly in relation to England's climate." The significance of this quiet admission was not lost on Isolde. She raised her eyes to his, finding there an expression of such earnest inquiry that it touched her deeply. Captain Meren believed the sheltered south-facing slopes of certain estates might provide suitable conditions, she said softly, with proper drainage and wind protection. "Kesmond possesses several such locations," the Duke replied, his voice equally quiet, "including a walled garden near the lake that has remained uncultivated since my mother's passing." The moment stretched between them, waited with possibility. Then, with careful deliberation, the Duke reached across the table to where her hand rested beside the open book. His fingers brushed hers, a touch so light yet so profound that Isolde felt it like a current through her entire being. "Isolde," he said, her name an intimate sound in the book-lined sanctuary, "I find myself contemplating possibilities I had long considered beyond my horizon." Morning brought mist rising from Kesmond's lake, transforming the landscape into something ethereal and expectant. Isolde stood at her chamber window, watching as the sun's early rays began to pierce the vapor, illuminating droplets that clung to the garden's roses like scattered diamonds. The previous evening's exchange in the library had shifted something fundamental between herself and the Duke. His gentle touch, the quiet intensity of his gaze, the careful words that approached but did not quite articulate deeper feelings, all had continued to resonate through her thoughts as she'd prepared for bed, and had followed her into dreams filled with olive groves and possibilities. A discreet knock announced Fletcher, Lady Caroline's maid, who had been assigned to assist her during her stay. "Good morning, my lady," she greeted with a curtsy. "His Grace asked me to inform you that breakfast is served at your convenience, and he hopes you might join him afterward for a tour of the eastern property, weather permitting." "Please tell His Grace I shall be down directly," Isolde replied, moving from the window to complete her morning preparations. She selected a walking dress of sage green, practical yet becoming, with her silver olive leaf brooch at the collar. As Fletcher arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style, Isolde found herself contemplating the unusual position in which she now found herself, a guest of honor at one of England's great houses, consulting on matters of educational reform, and increasingly drawn to its master in ways that transcended professional collaboration. Breakfast was served in a morning room whose tall windows overlooked the formal gardens. Lady Caroline was already present, reviewing correspondence with efficient concentration. "Good morning, Lady Merrin," she greeted, setting aside her letters. "I trust you slept well." "Exceedingly so," Isolde confirmed. "Kesmond possesses a remarkable tranquility, one of its chief virtues," Lady Caroline agreed, "though I confess London's diversions occasionally tempt me from rural serenity." They conversed companionably as Isolde partook of the excellent breakfast. The Duke's sister, having apparently satisfied herself as to Isolde's character and intentions, had adopted a more sisterly manner that suggested cautious approval. "Ah, Alaric," Lady Caroline remarked as her brother entered the morning room, "I was just telling Lady Merrin of your plans to show her the potential school site." The Duke appeared particularly vital this morning, his tall figure enhanced by country attire that suggested active purpose rather than mere aristocratic leisure. "If the weather and your inclination permit," he said, addressing Isolde with a smile that held private meaning. "The mist is burning off rapidly. I have come prepared for country exploration," Isolde assured him, indicating her practical ensemble. After breakfast concluded, they set out on foot, following a gravel path that wound through the formal gardens before transitioning to a more natural landscape. The Duke walked beside her with easy grace, occasionally indicating points of interest across the estate's expansive vista. "The tenant farms begin beyond that stand of elms," he explained. 12 families whose children would be the primary beneficiaries of our proposed school." "How many children?" Isolde inquired, her mind already calculating practical requirements. 27 at present, ranging from 4 to 12 years of age," he replied. "Though several families in the village proper have expressed interest as well, which would add perhaps 15 more." Their path led them across a stone bridge spanning a stream that fed into the main lake. Beyond lay meadows where sheep grazed in peaceful contentment, their soft bleating carried on the morning breeze. "This reminds me of Dorset," Isolde remarked, pausing to admire the pastoral scene. "My father's parish was surrounded by similar countryside." "You were raised in Dorset, then?" the Duke inquired, his interest evident. "I had understood your early years were spent in Cambridge. After my mother's passing, I was sent to my maternal grandparents in Cambridge," she explained. "My father believed a scholar's household would provide greater advantages than a rural vicarage." "And did it?" "In terms of education, certainly," she acknowledged. "Though I missed the freedom of country life, Cambridge was all stone and propriety." Their conversation continued as they walked, exchanging fragments of personal history that gradually assembled a more complete understanding of each other's formation. The Duke spoke of his father's stern expectations and his mother's gentler influence. Isolde described her grandfather's library and her grandmother's quiet insistence that a woman's mind deserved cultivation equal to a man's. At length, they reached their destination, a substantial stone building set on a gentle rise overlooking the surrounding countryside. The former tithe barn retained its medieval bones, though its original purpose had long since been superseded by more modern agricultural arrangements. "The structure remains sound," the Duke explained, as they entered through massive oak doors. The roof was replaced during my father's time and the foundations are excellent. Isolde moved through the spacious interior, a practical eye assessing its potential. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. The space possessed a quiet dignity, a sense of purpose that transcended its utilitarian origins. "It's perfect," she declared, turning to face the Duke with genuine enthusiasm. "The proportions would allow for proper separation of age groups, and the light is exceptional. With proper flooring, heating, and appropriate furnishings, I had hoped you would approve," he replied, his expression warming at her evident pleasure. "I've taken the liberty of having preliminary sketches prepared by the estate carpenter." He produced a leather portfolio from a wooden chest near the entrance, spreading the drawings on a rough trestle table that stood nearby. Isolde bent over them with keen interest, noting the thoughtful arrangements that incorporated many of the principles she had discussed in her curriculum outline. "How you've given this considerable thought," she observed, looking up to find him watching her with that same quiet intensity she had glimpsed in the library. "I find myself increasingly invested in possibilities," he replied, the simple statement laden with meaning that extended beyond architectural plans. Their eyes held for a long moment, the dust-filled sunlight creating a private world around them. Then, with deliberate care, the Duke reached across the drawings to touch her hand. "Isolde," he began, his voice deepening with emotion, "I must speak plainly. My interest in educational reform, while genuine, has become inextricably linked with my regard for you." She felt her heart quicken, though she maintained her outward composure. "Such honesty deserves equal candor," she responded softly. "My presence at Kesmond is motivated by more than professional consultation." A smile of rare brilliance transformed his features, a private expression she had glimpsed only in unguarded moments. "Then we find ourselves in a state of mutual regard." "So it would appear," she agreed, allowing her fingers to curl around his in acknowledgement. "I had not expected," he began, then paused, seeming to search for words adequate to the moment. "After Eleanor's death, I believed certain chambers of my heart permanently sealed." "Grief has its own geography," Isolde said gently. "Its borders shift with time, though the territory remains." "You understand," he observed, his expression reflecting wonder and relief in equal measure. "Few do." "I have walked similar landscapes," she reminded him, thinking of her olive leaf brooch and all it represented. "Though our paths differed." The Duke lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture of profound respect. "I would know where our paths might lead, if travelled together." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses intruded upon their private moment. The Duke released her hand reluctantly, moving toward the open doorway with subtle protectiveness. "Lord Ellsworth," he identified, surprise evident in his tone. "Caroline did not mention he planned to join us at Kesmond." Isolde composed herself, smoothing her skirts and taking a steadying breath as a distinguished gentleman dismounted in the yard outside. Lord Ellsworth, Lady Caroline's husband and a man of considerable political influence, entered the barn with the confidence of long familiarity. "Davin," he greeted, then, noting Isolde's presence, added with a formal bow, "Your servant, madam. I must beg your pardon for the interruption." "Lady Merrin, may I present my brother-in-law, Lord Ellsworth?" the Duke said, his manner resuming its customary formality. "Ellsworth, Lady Isolde Merrin, who consults on our educational initiative." "Lady Caroline mentioned your project," Lord Ellsworth acknowledged. "A commendable endeavour." Though his words were appropriate, Isolde detected a certain reserve in his manner, an assessing quality that suggested he had formed his own conclusions regarding her presence at Kesmond. "I regret disturbing your inspection," he continued, addressing the Duke. "However, matters of some urgency have arisen in London that require your attention. I've brought correspondence from your solicitor, as well as communications from the Home Office." The Duke accepted the leather dispatch case with a slight frown. "Nothing that could not have been forwarded through normal channels?" "Some matters benefit from personal delivery," Lord Ellsworth replied meaningfully. "Perhaps we might discuss them as we return to the house." Understanding that private matters required discussion, Isolde stepped forward. "I should like to make some notes on the space while impressions remain fresh," she said. "If you gentlemen would excuse me, I shall follow when my work is complete." The Duke's expression conveyed both regret and reassurance. "Of course, though perhaps—" "I shall send a groom to accompany Lady Merrin," Lord Ellsworth interjected smoothly. "The path, while direct, crosses several meadows." As the gentleman departed, Isolde found herself alone in the sun-dappled interior of the ancient barn. She moved thoughtfully through the space, making genuine observations in her small notebook, though her mind frequently returned to the conversation so meaningfully interrupted. The Duke's declaration had not surprised her. Their growing connection had developed with a quiet inevitability that seemed to transcend conventional courtship. What had surprised her was the depth of her own response, the profound rightness she had felt as their hands joined across architectural drawings and unspoken promises. Yet Lord Ellsworth's arrival had served as a pointed reminder of the world beyond their private understanding. Whatever urgent matters he had brought from London would inevitably reflect the Duke's position, responsibilities, and the societal expectations that accompanied his rank. When she had completed her notes, Isolde emerged to find a young groom waiting patiently with 2 horses. "His lordship thought you might prefer riding to walking for the return journey, my lady," he explained. "This is Willow, one of the Duchess's former mounts, gentle but sure-footed." The mention of the late Duchess gave Isolde a momentary pause. As she settled into the side saddle, adjusting her skirts with practiced ease, she found herself contemplating the woman who had preceded her in the Duke's affections. Eleanor Davin had been born to the aristocracy, groomed from childhood for the role of Duchess, her lineage as impeccable as her deportment. How different from a naval captain's widow with modest means and progressive ideas. The ride back to Kesmond Hall provided time for reflection. As the elegant facade came into view, Isolde felt a renewed awareness of the gulf between her circumstances and the world represented by the ancient estate. Yet the Duke himself had spoken of possibilities, of paths travelled together, despite their different origins. As she dismounted at the stables, she was surprised to find Lady Caroline awaiting her. "I thought we might walk in the walled garden before luncheon," she suggested, her expression revealing nothing of the unexpected developments brought by her husband's arrival. They strolled in companionable silence until reaching a secluded garden enclosed by weathered brick walls. Espaliered fruit trees lined the perimeter, while central beds lay partially prepared for planting. "This was my mother's particular domain," Lady Caroline explained, leading Isolde along a gravel path. "After her passing, Alaric could not bear to see it altered or neglected. It has remained largely as she left it, tended but not reimagined." Isolde recognized the significance of being shown this private space. "It has a peaceful quality," she observed, "a sense of patient waiting." "Yes," Lady Caroline agreed thoughtfully, "though perhaps it has waited long enough." She paused, then continued with careful deliberation. "My brother has suffered profound losses, Lady Merrin. Our parents, then Eleanor, all within the space of 3 years. He retreated into duty, as men often do when emotion becomes unbearable. A natural refuge," Isolde acknowledged, understanding all too well the shelter that responsibility provided against grief's raw edges. "Natural but not always beneficial," Lady Caroline replied. "Until recently, I had resigned myself to watching him move through life half-present, fulfilling obligations without genuine engagement." She turned to face Isolde directly. "Then he encountered you." The simple statement hung in the garden's quiet air. Isolde met the other woman's gaze steadily, recognizing both assessment and tentative approval. "I make no claim on your brother's affections, Lady Caroline," she said with quiet dignity, "though I value them more than I can properly express." "Claims are unnecessary where genuine feeling exists," the Duke's sister replied. "I have observed my brother these past days, Lady Merrin. He has returned to himself in your company, not as he was before loss shaped him, but as someone new, integrating past and present with honest purpose." Isolde felt a surge of emotion at these words, recognizing in them a truth she had glimpsed but not fully articulated. "Your brother has awakened similar possibilities within me," she admitted. "Though I confess, the differences in our circumstances give me pause." Lady Caroline's expression softened into genuine warmth. "Circumstances can be negotiated," she said. "Character cannot. The latter concerns me far more than the former." As they continued their circuit of the walled garden, their conversation turned to the practical aspects of the proposed school, yet Isolde remained aware that something significant had transpired, a tacit approval from the woman whose opinion mattered most to the Duke after his own. When they returned to the house, they found the gentleman awaiting them in the drawing-room. The Duke's expression brightened visibly at their entrance, though Isolde noted a certain tension in his bearing that suggested the urgent matters had indeed proven consequential. "I trust your exploration of the tithe barn proved satisfactory," he inquired, moving to join them. "Entirely so," Isolde confirmed. "The space offers exceptional potential." "Excellent," he replied. though she detected distraction beneath his courteous response. "Perhaps after luncheon we might discuss your recommendations in greater detail." Luncheon proceeded with pleasant conversation, though Isolde noted meaningful glances exchanged between the Duke and his brother-in-law. Lady Caroline maintained easy discourse about the estate's planned summer festivities, yet beneath the social pleasantries flowed undercurrents of unspoken concerns. As the meal concluded, Lord Ellsworth addressed Isolde directly for the first time since their brief encounter at the barn. "I understand you were widowed some years ago, Lady Merrin. Captain Merrin served with distinction, I believe." "Yes," she confirmed, surprised by this direct reference to her late husband. "He commanded the merchant vessel Fortitude, primarily on Mediterranean routes." "Ah, the Fortitude," Lord Ellsworth nodded. "Lost in the Channel crossing during that terrible storm in '46. A great tragedy, and a significant loss for certain commercial interests." There was something in his tone, a subtle emphasis that suggested knowledge beyond the commonly reported facts of the disaster. Isolde felt a chill of apprehension, though she maintained her composure. "The sea grants no special consideration, even to the most worthy vessels," she replied evenly. "Indeed not," he agreed. "Although sometimes what appears to be nature's caprice masks more deliberate circumstances." The Duke intervened with unusual sharpness. "Ellsworth, Lady Merrin has no interest in political speculation regarding past tragedies." "Of course," Lord Ellsworth conceded smoothly. "Forgive my professional tendency toward analysis, Lady Merrin. The diplomatic service encourages unfortunate habits of inquiry." The exchange left Isolde with a distinct sense of unease. Lord Ellsworth's pointed reference to deliberate circumstances suggested knowledge of aspects surrounding the Fortitude's loss that she herself did not possess. More troubling still was the Duke's intervention, his tone suggesting he shared whatever information his brother-in-law had obliquely referenced. As they rose from the table, the Duke addressed her with careful formality. "Lady Merrin, I regret that matters requiring my attention have arisen. Perhaps we might postpone our discussion until this evening." "Of course," she assured him, though questions multiplied in her mind. "I had planned to sketch the Tithe Barn's interior while impressions remain fresh." When she returned to her chamber to retrieve her drawing materials, Isolde found herself troubled by the subtle shift in atmosphere that Lord Ellsworth's arrival had precipitated. The Duke's declaration in the barn had spoken of mutual regard and future possibilities, yet now, hidden currents of knowledge and obligation seemed to flow beneath the surface of Kesmond's tranquil exterior. As she gazed out at the walled garden visible from her window, Isolde touched the silver olive leaf at her collar, a talisman of past love and present courage. Whatever complications lay ahead, she would face them with the clear-eyed honesty that Captain Merrin had valued and that the Duke of Kesmond had recognized. 3 days passed at Kesmond with curious duality, mornings devoted to educational planning, afternoons to exploration of the estate, evenings to quiet conversations by the library fire. Yet beneath this pleasant routine, Isolde sensed unspoken complications. The Duke maintained his attentive courtesy, but something had shifted since Lord Ellsworth's arrival, a subtle reserve that suggested internal conflict. On the 4th morning, Isolde sat in the walled garden, sketching potential classroom arrangements for the Tithe Barn School. The spring sunshine warmed the sheltered space, coaxing fragrance from early blooms that lined the carefully tended beds. "I hoped I might find you here," came the Duke's voice as he entered through the wrought iron gate. "Lady Caroline mentioned your fondness for this sanctuary." Isolde set aside her sketches, studying his expression. The tension she had observed in recent days remained, though something in his manner suggested resolution rather than continued uncertainty. "It possesses remarkable tranquility," she replied. "I find clarity comes more easily in such surroundings." "Then perhaps it is an appropriate setting for what I must say," he remarked, settling beside her on the stone bench. For a moment, he gazed at the awakening garden, gathering thoughts as carefully as one might gather rare blooms. "Lord Ellsworth's arrival was not coincidental," he began at length. "He brought information regarding a matter that has occupied certain government offices for some years, a matter connected, I regret to say, with the loss of the Fortitude." Isolde felt a chill despite the morning warmth. "I don't understand." "The official inquiry concluded that the vessel was lost due to the Channel storm," the Duke continued carefully, "but documents recently deciphered suggest another possibility, that the ship may have been deliberately scuttled." "Impossible," Isolde whispered, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. "Hale would never—" Not by Captain Merrin's hand, the Duke clarified quickly. The evidence suggests sabotage by parties unknown, targeting not the vessel itself, but specific cargo. The olive saplings, Isolde's brow furrowed in confusion, they held no value beyond sentimental significance. Not the olive saplings, he replied gently, but rather what was concealed among them, diplomatic correspondence from the Ottoman court to certain sympathetic British officials, correspondence that, had it reached its destination, might have altered England's position in the Eastern question. Isolde's mind reeled. Hale knew nothing of diplomatic pouches. He transported agricultural specimens for a private collector, Lord Blackwood's Mediterranean acquisitions. Lord Blackwood's involvement is precisely what has drawn the Home Office's attention, the Duke explained. His movements during that period have retroactively raised concerns, particularly given his subsequent disappearance from public life. Are you suggesting, Isolde began, unable to complete the thought that formed like ice in her mind. I suggest nothing, he assured her. I merely share what has been conveyed to me as a member of the House of Lords, with particular interest in the matter. Particular interest, Isolde repeated, sudden understanding dawning. Because of me, the Duke met her gaze directly. Because the widow of Captain Merrin now sits in my library, walks my gardens, and has claimed a place in my heart that I had thought permanently emptied. Despite the gravity of their discussion, Isolde felt warmth spread through her at this quiet declaration. Yet questions multiplied, demanding voice. Why has this information surfaced now, after 3 years? Lord Blackwood has died, the Duke replied. His private papers, now in government hands, have revealed connections previously obscured, connections that suggest Captain Merrin was an unwitting courier in matters far beyond botanical specimens. And Hale paid with his life, Isolde whispered, grief freshly edged with anger, along with 27 souls who trusted his command. The investigation continues, the Duke said gently, but Lord Ellsworth believed, and I concurred, that you deserved to know what has been discovered, particularly as further revelations may become public. Isolde rose, moving toward an espaliered pear tree whose blossoms trembled in the light breeze. Her fingers touched the silver olive leaf at her collar, that talisman of memory now complicated by shadowed knowledge. All this time, she said softly, I believed the storm alone took him, that nature, capricious and powerful, had simply claimed its due. There was clarity in that belief, however painful, but this, she turned to face the Duke, who had risen to join her. This suggests human malice behind natural tragedy. How does one reconcile such knowledge? With difficulty, he acknowledged, and never completely, but perhaps with the understanding that knowing truth, however painful, honors those who were denied it. She studied his face, the compassion in his grey eyes, the steadiness of his gaze. You feared this knowledge might alter my feelings, she realized. That learning of political intrigue surrounding Hale's death might somehow diminish what has grown between us. The thought occurred, he admitted. Power creates shadows, Isolde. As Duke, as peer, as participant in governance, I cannot pretend my position exists in pure light. Lord Ellsworth represents aspects of authority that operate beyond public view, sometimes with tragic consequences. I would understand if association with such systems now seems tainted. You mistake me entirely, she replied with sudden clarity. It is not systems I have come to value, Alaric, but the man who navigates them with conscience intact. You sought truth on my behalf, knowing it might cost you personally. That reveals character, not taint. Relief softened his features. With deliberate care, he reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. These past days, as Ellsworth and I consulted with various officials regarding how best to proceed, I found myself contemplating what Captain Merrin would wish for you now. He left instructions, Isolde said softly. In his final letter, do not honor my memory by diminishing your future. A wise man, the Duke observed, who clearly understood the heart he had been fortunate enough to claim. As do you, she replied simply. His hands tightened around hers. Isolde, I had planned a more conventional setting for this moment, perhaps the rose garden at sunset, or beside the lake where generations of Davins have pledged themselves. But I find artifice impossible in the face of honest feeling. He drew a steadying breath. I love you, not despite the differences in our circumstances, but perhaps because of them. Your experiences, your principles, your courage in facing loss, all have awakened in me qualities I feared permanently dormant. Isolde felt her heart expand with emotion, too profound for casual expression. "And I love you," she responded, the words both simple and revolutionary. "Not for your title or position, but for the man who seeks truth, values education, and regards privilege as responsibility rather than entitlement." The Duke, Alaric, lifted her hands to his lips. "Then will you consider a future joined with mine? Not as Duchess merely, but as partner in all endeavors. The school would be merely our beginning." "There will be opposition," she cautioned, practical even in this transcendent moment. "Society will question your choice, and political circles may view me with suspicion given these new revelations about Hale's voyage." "Society questions everything until precedent renders it acceptable," he replied, with a hint of the dry humor she had come to cherish. "As for political concerns, Lord Ellsworth himself acknowledged your complete innocence in the matter. The Home Office seeks Blackwood's co-conspirators, not nautical widows who teach orphans to draw." Isolde laughed despite herself, the sound bright in the walled garden's serenity. "You make even intrigue seem manageable." "Most circumstances are, with proper perspective," he assured her. "So I ask again, will you marry me, Isolde Merin? Will you bring your olive branches to Kesmond's soil and see what might flourish?" She looked at him, this man who had entered her life through a dinner of social obligation and transformed it through genuine connection. "Yes," she said simply, "I will." His smile illuminated features too often schooled to aristocratic reserve. With gentle deliberation, he drew her into his embrace, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of tenderness and promise in equal measure. When they parted, Isolde's gaze was drawn to movement near the garden wall, new buds unfurling on a climbing rose, their tender green a testament to spring's persistent renewal. "Life continues," she observed softly, "despite loss, despite complication, and sometimes because of them," Alaric added, his arm still around her waist. "Without winter's severity, spring holds less meaning." As they walked together through the awakening garden, planning their announcement to Lady Caroline and considering the practical aspects of their future union, Isolde felt a profound sense of rightness, not the uncomplicated happiness of youth, but the deeper joy of mature hearts, recognizing kindred courage. The silver olive leaf at her collar caught the morning light, transformed from memorial to promise. Captain Merrin's final gift had been freedom from obligation to grief. The Duke of Kesmond's gift was partnership in creating meaning beyond loss. That evening, as the household gathered in the drawing room before dinner, Alaric formally announced their engagement. Lady Caroline's delight proved both genuine and unsurprising, suggesting she had anticipated this development with characteristic perspicacity. Lord Ellsworth offered congratulations with diplomatic precision, though his gaze held respectful assessment as it rested on Isolde. "To new beginnings," Lady Caroline proposed, raising her glass in toast, "and to educational innovation at Kesmond. To olive trees in English soil," Alaric added, his eyes meeting Isolde's with private meaning. Later, as Isolde prepared for bed, she stood at her chamber window, gazing out at Kesmond's moonlit grounds. The estate stretched before her, no longer an intimidating symbol of aristocratic power, but a living community with needs, possibilities, and a future she would help shape. She touched the olive leaf brooch one final time before setting it on her dressing table. "Thank you, Hale," she whispered to the quiet room, "for courage once lost, now found again." In the morning, she would begin planning not just a school but a life renewed through unexpected love. The widow and the Duke, an unlikely pairing by society's reckoning, yet one founded on shared values and mutual respect. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together, their separate paths now joined in common purpose. As she drifted towards sleep, Isolde's final thoughts were not of the past's shadows, but of the walled garden where olive saplings might soon take root, tender, vulnerable, yet surprisingly resilient when granted proper care and the courage to grow. The olive trees flourished beyond all expectation. 5 years after their planting, they stood in orderly rows within Kesmond's walled garden, their silver-green leaves catching summer light with quiet luminosity. Expert opinion had deemed the endeavor futile. Mediterranean specimens could not possibly thrive in English soil, yet Lady Isolde de Vennes, Duchess of Kesmond, had persisted with characteristic determination, installing glass shelters for winter protection and selecting the hardiest varieties from northern Italian stock. "You appear inordinately pleased with yourself, Your Grace," observed the Duke, finding his wife amidst her beloved trees on a golden August afternoon. A basket of freshly harvested olives rested beside her, their dark purple skins suggesting the rich oil they would yield. "I confess a certain satisfaction," she replied, her smile warming as he approached, "though the credit belongs more to the tree's stubborn nature than to my horticultural skills." "Stubbornness," he remarked, kissing her hand with formal courtliness that belied the intimate humor in his eyes, "appears to be a quality I have learned to value most profoundly." Isolde laughed, the sound drawing answering giggles from the small figure partially hidden behind an olive trunk. "You may emerge from your inadequate concealment, young lady," she called. "Your father has discovered our sanctuary." Lady Margaret Davin, aged 4 and possessed of her mother's direct gaze and her father's determined chin, stepped into view with the dignity of one caught, but unrepentant. "We were conducting a botanical investigation," she announced, using the precise vocabulary that had become her hallmark. "Mama says these olives are almost ready for pressing." "Indeed they are," the Duke confirmed, lifting his daughter into his arms with practiced ease. "And I believe your brother has been searching for you with some urgency. Something about promised assistance with his rock collection." Margaret's expression shifted to one of sudden recollection. "I forgot James and the rocks. Mama, may I be excused from botanical duties?" "You may," Isolde agreed gravely, "though I expect a full report on limestone varieties at dinner." As their daughter ran toward the garden gate, copper curls bouncing in the sunlight, the Duke settled beside his wife on the stone bench that had witnessed their engagement 5 years earlier. "She grows more like you each day," he observed, "precise in speech, determined in purpose, and entirely captivating, while James embodies your thoughtful reserve," Isolde added, thinking of their 6-year-old son whose serious nature masked a gentle sensitivity, though his passion for geological specimens suggests scientific inclinations neither of us claim. "The next generation improves upon its predecessors," Alaric remarked, his hand finding hers with the easy familiarity of established intimacy, as evidenced by this morning's reports from Kesmond School. The school had exceeded even Isolde's ambitious vision. What began as a modest educational experiment in the converted tithe barn had evolved into a model frequently cited in parliamentary debates on rural education reform. Children of tenant farmers studied alongside village residents, their curriculum balancing academic subjects with practical skills suited to their community's needs. "Reverend Thornhill mentioned 4 more families have requested admission," Isolde noted. "We shall need to consider expanding the eastern wing if growth continues at this pace." "A pleasant difficulty," the Duke observed, "and one that validates your educational philosophy rather conclusively." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, surveying the olive grove that had become both symbol and substance of their shared life. Beyond the garden walls, Kesmond's lands stretched toward the horizon, productive, prosperous, and increasingly progressive in agricultural methods and tenant relations. "I received correspondence from Lord Ellsworth this morning," Alaric mentioned, his tone carefully casual. "The investigation has finally concluded." Isolde's expression grew thoughtful. The shadowed circumstances surrounding the Fortitude's loss had gradually clarified over the years, revealing a complex network of diplomatic intrigue centered around Lord Blackwood's covert activities. "Have they identified the actual saboteurs?" "2 men formerly employed in Blackwood's service," the Duke confirmed, "both now deceased, but their confessions were secured before their passing. The official record will acknowledge that Captain Merrin and his crew were innocent victims of political machinations entirely beyond their knowledge." "After all this time," Isolde said softly, her fingers touching the silver olive leaf brooch she now wore only on significant occasions. "How curious that justice arrives when its absence no longer consumes me." "Perhaps that is the nature of healing," Alaric suggested, "when truth matters more than vindication." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Winters, who had remained at Kesmond as the children's governess after Lady Hartwood's passing. "Your Grace," she addressed the Duchess with the formal address she maintained, despite years of familiar service, "Lady Caroline has arrived with the Earl, and young Lord Ellsworth appears most eager to show Master James his new microscope." "We shall come directly," Isolde assured her, gathering her basket of olives. As Mrs. Winters departed, she turned to her husband with a smile that still quickened his pulse after 5 years of marriage. "I believe we are required for aunt and nephew duties." The Duke rose, offering his arm with courtly grace. "Duty calls most pleasantly these days." As they walked through the walled garden toward the house, they passed the small grove of fruit trees where stone benches had been installed for the school children's outdoor lessons. The space had become a favorite gathering place during summer sessions, with young scholars sketching botanical specimens under the same trees where their duchess had once taught orphans in London. "Do you ever wonder," Alaric asked, as they paused to admire a particularly fine apricot tree, "what might have transpired had I declined the Marquis of Thurwood's dinner invitation that evening?" "Frequently," Isolde admitted, "though I suspect Providence occasionally employs social obligation as its instrument." "A most unexpected instrument," he agreed, his expression softening as he regarded her, "yet one for which I remain profoundly grateful." The Duke and Duchess of Kesmond continued toward their home, where family awaited and responsibilities beckoned, not the hollow obligations of rank, but the meaningful duties of chosen purpose. The afternoon sun illuminated Kesmond Hall's ancient facade, its warm light suggesting welcome rather than imposing grandeur. Inside, voices already filled the entrance hall, Lady Caroline exchanging news with Mrs. Winters, young Lord Ellsworth demonstrating his microscope to an enraptured James, Margaret interrogating the Earl about limestone formations on his estate. The sounds of family, connection, and shared curiosity echoed through spaces once characterized by formal silence. "We have created something remarkable here," Isolde observed quietly as they paused at the threshold. "No more remarkable than what you created at St. Agnes's," Alaric replied, "though perhaps on a different scale." "Scale matters less than substance," she reminded him, a principle that had guided their partnership from its beginning. That evening, as the extended family gathered for dinner, conversation flowed with the easy rhythm of genuine connection. Lady Caroline described her ongoing battle to establish a women's college at Oxford, while the Earl contributed political insights regarding educational reform legislation. James solemnly presented his collection of rock specimens, carefully labelled in his precise handwriting, while Margaret interrogated the adults about olive oil production methods. Isolde, seated at the foot of the table, as befit her position as Duchess, caught her husband's gaze and held it for a moment of private understanding. Their worlds, once separated by rank, circumstance, and expectation, had melded into something neither could have envisioned alone. Later, with the children settled for the night and guests retired to their chambers, the Duke and Duchess walked together through the gallery, where generations of Davins gazed from gilded frames. Among these aristocratic visages now hung two additional portraits, Captain Hale Merrin in his merchant naval uniform, and Reverend Thomas Merrin, Isolde's father, his scholarly countenance captured by a talented artist commissioned by the Duke. "The past joins the present," Alaric observed as they paused before these newer additions. "As it should. Creating space for the future," Isolde added, thinking of James and Margaret who would one day walk this same gallery, understanding their heritage as a convergence of different worlds, united by shared values. In the Duke's study, where they often spent evening hours in companionable work, a small olive sapling grew in a ceramic pot, propagated from their garden's first successful tree. Beside it lay architectural drawings for the school's proposed expansion, alongside parliamentary reports on agricultural reform and correspondence from educational innovators across Europe. "Tomorrow, we should inspect the North Tenant cottages," Isolde remarked as they reviewed estate matters. "The new roofing technique appears promising, but I'd like to confirm its effectiveness before implementing it more broadly." "Always the practical visionary," Alaric observed with affectionate admiration, "managing both immediate needs and long-term improvement. A quality I believe you once claimed to value," she reminded him with a smile. "Among many," he acknowledged, setting aside estate papers to focus entirely on his wife, "though none more than your courage in embracing unexpected possibilities." Isolde rose from her desk, moving to stand beside the window, where moonlight silvered Kesmond's formal gardens. "It required less courage than you imagine," she said softly, "when the possibility offered such profound meaning." The Duke joined her, his arm slipping around her waist with the familiar ease of established intimacy. Together they gazed out at the estate they had gradually transformed, not through radical change, but through purposeful evolution guided by shared principles. 5 years, he mused. It seems both a moment and a lifetime. "The curious elasticity of happiness," Isolde observed. "It expands to fill whatever space we create for it." As midnight approached, they retired to their chambers, no longer the separate apartments convention dictated for aristocratic couples, but shared rooms that reflected their preference for proximity over protocol. The silver olive leaf brooch rested in its place of honor on Isolde's dressing table, alongside the signet ring Alaric had worn to the Marquis's dinner 5 years earlier. Symbols of beginnings now incorporated into a life built on mutual respect, shared purpose and love that had matured like the olive trees in their walled garden, stronger for having faced skepticism, more valuable for defying conventional expectation. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, nourishing the estate's fields and gardens. Within Kesmond's ancient walls, the Duke and Duchess of Kesmond discussed tomorrow's responsibilities, shared quiet confidences, and confirmed once more the wisdom of their unlikely union. Two paths that might never have crossed had now become a single journey, richer for the diverse landscapes from which it had emerged, steadier for being travelled together. As they drifted towards sleep, the last whispered words between them were not of duty or obligation, but of gratitude for the unexpected dinner that had changed everything, the final prospect that had proven, against all prediction, to be the beginning rather than the end. In the garden of life, the most unexpected seeds often yield the richest harvest. The Duke and Lady Merrin's story reminds us that true connection transcends the artificial boundaries we construct of class, circumstance, or expectation. Their journey teaches us that resilience is not merely surviving loss, but allowing ourselves to be transformed by it. We see in their union the profound truth that genuine love does not demand we forget our past, but rather invites us to bring it forward, like Isolde's olive leaf brooch, a symbol that evolved from memorial to promise. Their story whispers to us that healing comes not from sealing off wounded chambers of our hearts, but from allowing them to be gently reopened by someone who recognizes both our pain and our possibility. The olive trees that thrived against expert opinion stand as testament to the power of persistence in seemingly infertile ground. So too does love sometimes take root precisely where convention deems it impossible, growing stronger for having overcome skepticism. Their unconventional partnership reminds us that true nobility lies not in titles or tradition, but in the courage to recognize worth beyond established measures. Perhaps most poignantly, we witness how grief, when honored rather than avoided, can prepare the soil for unexpected joy. Captain Merrin's final instruction, "Do not honor my memory by diminishing your future," speaks to all who have known loss, offering permission to continue living fully while carrying the past with reverence rather than restraint. In a world increasingly defined by division, the Duke and Duchess of Kesmond offer us a glimpse of what becomes possible when we seek understanding across difference, when purpose aligns beyond position, and when we recognize that the most meaningful legacies are built not on preservation of the old, but on nurturing that which promises renewal. Dear readers, if this tale of unexpected love and renewal has touched your heart, I invite you to share its impact in the comments below. How has the journey of the Duke and Lady Merrin resonated with your own experiences of loss, possibility, or connections that defied expectation? Subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depths of human resilience and the transformative power of authentic connection. Each week we journey through different eras and hearts, discovering timeless truths in the most unexpected encounters. If you found yourself particularly moved by the olive leaf motif or the walled garden symbolism, mention it in your comment. Your insights enrich our shared appreciation of these narrative elements. Until our next story unfolds, remember that like the Duke's final dinner of prospects, what appears to be an ending might simply be the first chapter of your most meaningful beginning.